The title of the talk tonight is, what is the work of this whole life? And it's a question that was asked, what is the work of this whole life? And the answer, at one point in time by the Buddha was an appropriate response. So you might think for a moment, well, why did you show up here tonight other than habit life? This is what you do on Tuesday night. We all have a variety of reasons for coming here. And for those of you who are here for the first time, might be just to sort of check it out. What happens here on Tuesday night with this organization? For some of us, we come here because we want to sit with a group of spiritual friends. We want to practice together. There's some support there that we receive and that we can offer to those we're here with. Sometimes we're here because we want to be inspired, we want to hear something or hope that we hear something that is instructive or useful. Or, perhaps even more true, it's something that we know but we've forgotten. We don't remember it, so we want to be reminded. And sometimes maybe it's just to get out of the house, depending on who's there. But each week that we show up here, there's some intention. We have some intention about being here. And for a lot of us, it's to wake up a little bit more, to little by little, to understand more and more what's true, what's really true. And because we are living here in the West, we tend to start with ourselves. That's fairly natural. And I think many of us have the belief that that's the starting point anyway. I mean, this is this body sitting here, so I'm just going to start right here. Maybe it's a little bit like what the poet, and I am not going to be able to pronounce his name correctly, he's Swedish, Tomas Tranströmer is maybe close. He's a Swedish poet who won the Nobel Prize in 2011. He died last year, and he had this to say about the individual self. We always feel younger than we are. I carry inside myself my earlier faces, as a tree contains its rings. The sum of them is me. The mirror sees only my latest face, while I know all my previous ones. I am still the place where creation does some work on itself. Isn't that true? No matter what we believe, all those stories buried in all those tree rings of our lives, and the latest story that's conveyed by the mirror on the wall, we are still, thankfully, the place where creation does some work on itself. And what is the work of this whole life? The response from the Buddha and from many, many other spiritual leaders throughout history has been that what the work of this whole life is an appropriate response. And it's a response. It's not a pulling away from the world and going off and sitting and by yourself. It's a response to the world. And this is a challenge for us for two primary reasons. And there are many more, but these are two. One is because there's so much coming at us. There's so many challenges facing us. And the second reason is that in this century particularly, we must ask how the spiritual teachings that transcend color, class, and caste are hindered by discrimination and the dynamics of power, shame, economics, and ignorance. That's a huge topic that we could devote a year-long study to. So I'm just going to touch on it tonight, and we will delve more into it as time goes by. The first challenge to appropriate response, that there's so much coming at us. We think, again, from a sort of our individualistic Western perspective, that we can sort of neatly stack it into handy piles. So we can say, this is my personal life, and all of its challenges might include work, family, relationships, money, that kind of thing. And then over here we have another pile, and we might label it, that's the community pile of concerns, like what to do about the Confederate statues in town, inequality in housing or education. And then there's the national piece, the election cycle, the hurricane remnants, the Black Lives Matter movement. And then beyond that is the global concerns, climate change, terrorism, the refugee crisis. And each of these can be addressed separately as they are being done, as is being done in many quarters. So, for example, here in early December, I've mentioned before, and I'll just remind you that IMC is going to specifically look at what it means to be white in this culture and how racism has been an integral part of all of our histories. And so in conjunction with that, some people are now raising the question, is a new Dharma needed? One that deconstructs rather than amplifies systems of suffering. One that prepares us to weigh the shortcomings not only of our own minds, but also that of our communities. So the question then is, how do we forge a path towards reconciliation and self-liberation? And as we learn more about this issue and all the other issues that are facing us, it behooves us to have some grounding, not only to clearly see the lens through which we each are looking, but also to allow a greater awareness to suffuse our being, to see the truth of non-separation. And I think it was just last weekend, maybe in the Post, there was an article, did anybody see it, about trees communicating through their root systems? I see a couple heads nodding. This idea that there is so much more going on in the natural world than we can begin to ascertain. And this article was pointing to the fact that that trees can very quickly respond to some stimulus in the environment. For example, there's an infection with the pine beetle, and they send out messages very quickly to other trees in the forest that this is going on. So it's amazing what we don't know. So Kittisaro, who's an American Buddhist teacher, has written in a book entitled Listening to the Heart, the evolutionary imperative of our times demands that we evolve from seeing the world out there as separate and alien from us to directly knowing our intimacy with all things. He goes on to say, the shift from a dualistic consciousness to an awake awareness recognizes nothing is apart from anything else or from our deepest nature. When awareness is fixated on objects, it loses touch with the ground of being. By persistently and profoundly noticing change in all the sense spheres, we recognize that everything returns to the ground of listening, of knowing, of pure awareness. So what is the appropriate response to all these phenomena that we're experiencing? Well, one thing we know is from our direct practice is that kindness and compassion towards ourselves and these phenomena that we're experiencing is critical. What I've noticed for myself, and maybe you can identify with this, that whenever I'm caught in an old story, ruminating about something, there's a lot of tightness in the mind, in the body. And just as an example, I was in a conversation with a relative recently, and one sentence that got spoken evoked this incredible landslide of old scenarios and old feeling states. And I found myself not just rehashing the words and ruminating, but actually, for a time at least, I was reliving the story and acting as though I was a defense attorney. And I had to construct a case in my favor. And he said, and she said, and then he said, and then she said, and on and on. And it was all based on being fixated on a solid identity of self that needed some protection and that needed a little shoring up or needed to be right. So maybe you can identify with something similar. We get caught. So the appropriate response is to see that the heart is suffering with aversion, with clinging to wanting to be right, and to remember that kindness and compassion directed right here towards this self can enlarge the space around the experience. When we remember to breathe and remember to extend some kindness and compassion towards ourselves, there's a softening, there's a welcoming, an allowing. May this difficulty be received in kindness. It's almost as though we're creating what's already true. We're just remembering what's already unconditioned in the heart. And we're aligning ourselves with our own true nature in that moment. We're not fueling aversion. So we're not giving it more support, and therefore it will begin to fade if we can continue the practice. All of the craving that we're often engaged in, you could call them, it's almost like we're building a world, we're building a self. And when there's a strong sense of self, of I am this or I am that, then that craving really obscures our true nature. On the other hand, if we practice what we call the Brahma Viharas or the divine abodes, we build less world, less self. And just briefly to remind you of these, or to tell you about them if you don't know about them, these 4 divine abodes, they're called, are loving kindness, where we're essentially seeing the goodness really in everyone. Everyone. That's very hard to remember, particularly in this election cycle, perhaps. And we wish, not only that, but we wish for their happiness. And then there's compassion, which is often described as the quivering of the heart in response to suffering. And sympathetic joy, which rejoices in the good fortune of others. May your happiness and good fortune continue and increase. And that is a wonderful antidote to jealousy, resentment. I know that from personal experience. And the 4th one is equanimity, which simply recognizes that each of us is the owner of our thoughts, words, actions. We create our own happiness, our own unhappiness. It might seem paradoxical to think that cultivating these qualities actually make our sense of self less solid. The sense of self thins out and becomes a little more transparent. Maybe you've noticed this. If you're aware of some degree of inner equanimity and something happens, an irritant arises, the car in front of you cuts you off, or you're walking and the car keeps going, blocking your crossing a street, or there's a difficult interaction, someone interrupts you in a meeting. When those things arise, if there's some degree of inner equanimity, there's not as much obscuring of what's true. There's less suffering because there's some ease there. The sense of self is not so solid. We don't feel wronged. As we explore this thinning out of self, we see that it's not about getting rid of the self, but it's really about understanding the empty nature. Sometimes when we can see ourselves becoming something, we see reactivity arising, and we don't get entangled with it or lost in a construct of, this is me, my anger, my jealousy. We can remain more aware. We don't take that reactivity as a solid identity. And more importantly, it doesn't disturb us. So we see it as, oh, well, there comes that one again, that little resentment thing that arises now and then. Or here's fear coming up once more. And with this kind of awareness, there's no obscuring going on. The feeling states, the thoughts, they're just known as they are. Of course, in our daily lives, it's easy to get caught. It's easy to get identified. I'm angry, I'm anxious, I can't stand this. We have those moments, it happens. But even then, just reminding ourselves that it's possible to rest while this particular identity is here, and to name it, oh, resentment has arisen, this too. Even if we're not experiencing it clearly, it's still helpful because it loosens it a bit. It's not so tight, and we don't take it so personally. If you've ever tried to learn something new, and it didn't come easily or it didn't come as quickly as expected, then you know something about the mind states that can arise with thoughts like, I can't get this. How come everybody else is getting this? What's the matter with me? So it's a process. First, there's being able to let go of a sense of self as a screwed up person. We let go of that one. And then there's a loving of this self. I'm okay just as I am, which is healing. And I could take that as an identity. I'm okay just as I am. So I'm still not free because I'm now holding on to that identity. Beyond that, there is a fully letting go, seeing that there is love, that there doesn't have to be an object and a subject. Love just is, regardless of the conditions. And then maybe it's possible for the veils of all identities to fall away. What's the work of this whole life? An appropriate response. So we can hold the self in a way that's beautiful, or we can hold the self in a way that's suffering. And whenever I pick up a view of self as, I'm a failure, I don't get this, and I see that that's not helpful, the question is, can I put it down? We have these ideas about, I should be like this or like that, but this is what I've got. More capacity here, less capacity there. And isn't it a relief to rest in how it actually is and not need to be the other? Not to be caught in preference. There's a feeling sometimes that in those moments we're able to be more authentic. We don't have to create a self that's not good enough or athletic enough or smart enough or whatever your adjective may be. So the invitation is to kind of keep checking out your perspective. Am I being or talking from a constricted self or a particularly constructed identity? Or is there a possibility of being less identified, more aware, not judging, just noticing, seeing what filters are present, And if we can see that those filters are a little dusty or foggy, well, we can pause a while. Allow ourselves to adapt, to change, to clean the glass, to welcome not knowing. Just this. I don't know. It's okay. Oh, this is just a mistake. Do a little course correction. Move on with life. So I'll close with a poem called Empty Mind by Tom Barrett. If you want to just sit back and close your eyes and just take this in for a moment. Writing about empty mind is not easy. When I've got it, there are no words. When the words come, it goes away. Sitting in anger and fear, mind is full of the past and future. Images of catastrophes big and small jostle for a seat at the brain. Resentment, disappointment slide their way into heart spaces, pushing out loving kindness. Equanimity lies in pieces. Some of us scrape up that slimy emotional stuff and put it in jars to carry along with us. And then we complain that our load is too heavy. We need to put down that lumpy sack of ooze and take a breath. The sage said, I packed no provisions for my long journey, entering emptiness under the midnight moon. She did not pack her ego or her remembrance of self. She carried no big plans or regrets of the past. Like a wise fool, she may have even forgotten to leave. While she sits in darkness, the moon travels the sky. Thank you for coming, for listening, and for your practice.